growing up in Seattle, how have you seen the city change, and how has it impacted your own or affected your own personal experiences?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like Seattle's always been kind of a boom and bust town. I think its history is one of a lot of change and flux and expansion and recession. And our history is, like many other cities, has been based on, is very foundation has been displacement of indigenous peoples. So my obviously experience of living and growing up in Seattle is just like a very quick snapshot. And I think it's also a pattern that's been kind of cycling through since the city was settled. Um, but I think, especially around the time that I started Vanishing Seattle in 2016, I'd been seeing the impact of a boom period that was largely due to the rapid growth of the tech sector and big tech. And I'd say the motivation for starting that was just seeing this kind of accelerated disappearance, displacement, pricing out of a lot of Seattle small businesses and gathering spaces, also people from their homes and communities. And yeah, I think kind of saw it happening around me and also experienced it personally in terms of a lot of my friends having to move away, or the places that I frequented a lot and cared about and were third spaces for me or for other communities having to close. And that was the case with kind of what motivated me to make my very first post. So yeah, I think it's just seeing the impact of that even over the last 8 years since I started the project. It seems like it's just really not slowing down. It continues to be a pattern that I think impacts a lot of people in the city.
How have the concept, or how has the concept of third spaces for communities been impacted with the closing of so many businesses and spaces, like Busch Garden for you, but an alarmingly increasing amount of businesses closing, if that question makes sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think this idea of third spaces is something that I'm really fascinated by, and I think is like a big kind of running theme throughout the project. It is a loss when these spaces go away, not just because that's someone's life and livelihood and business, but because of all of the history and the energy and potential that that space has to hold people and to give birth to like new creative things emerging out of that. And with the pandemic, with rising rents, inflation, unaffordability, the lack of protections for tenants, residential and commercial, I think it's hard. I think there's been a lot of places that are closing, and not necessarily because they're not a successful or needed business, but because they're being displaced through unaffordability, or maybe their building gets sold, to build a luxury development, or these different reasons. And so, yeah, it just makes me think like, well, what are we doing? Like, what are we driving towards? Are we all just going to be, sitting isolated in our places, getting everything delivered through an app, and just, people are just trying to survive because all they have time for is, to hustle and work. And I think when you don't have those spaces, how do we come together? How do we organize? How do we make social change? So, yeah, I think it is, when you kind of zoom out and look at the larger picture, it can be concerning. It's not just like the barbershop or the bookstore or the bar. It's like these things, I think, hold a lot more meaning in people's lives.
Yeah. Because I think back to, a Somali shop in the Tequila area that unfortunately closed down. And even though, like, I would hate to go there with my mom just because I would have to be there for hours, but knowing that those memories were still there for me. I had aunties that were just checking in on me. I could grab a bite to eat there. I could just have a home away from home. And for it to just be taken away, it's kind of just like, you know, like heartbreaking to see a commercial residence being built up there, just to like know that that place used to be a home to so many people, economic opportunities for people who didn't have opportunities like those before. I'm wondering, like, what are your feelings towards Mayor Harrell's downtown activation plan, aimed at, again, revitalizing Seattle? What does it mean to revitalize our city?
Yeah, I feel like a lot of times, and this isn't just in Seattle, but kind of in a lot of urban areas and also over time, when there are plans to revitalize an urban area, a lot of times it just means like getting so-called undesirable elements out of sight, and like cleaning up the city. And who gets to determine like what that means and who's included in that, or who has to be kind of swept under the rug and out of sight. I feel like sometimes it can be about making it more palatable to tourists or to kind of downtown business interest, making it more sanitized and homogenized. I mean, we saw this happen downtown like the 90s and 2000s. We saw it happen in Times Square. And sometimes, you know, you'll have communities that are labeled as like urban blight or in need of revitalization, and as kind of this pretext to then remove, demolish, displace what was there for this kind of shiny new version of whatever civic boosters believe progress looks like. Like what do we mean when we, you know, a lot of times people talk about Seattle as like we need to be a world-class city. But again, like, what does that mean? Who is that catering to? Like, in my mind, you need to have people of all backgrounds and incomes. You need service workers, you need artists, you need teachers, you need organizers, not just, you know, like upper crust white collar workers in order to have a world-class city.
Why do you think that there have been efforts to create programs like Seattle Restored, which offers artists and entrepreneurs office space or vacant storefronts, but many other local businesses and spaces are closing their doors? Why do you think that's taking place?
Yeah, I mean, I wish I knew or had like a succinct answer. I mean, I think it's complicated. There's like a lot of factors. I mean, I think, you know, just running this account, I've seen some themes and trends kind of over the years, just some commonalities in why places are closing. And yeah, I'm super appreciative and stoked for programs like Seattle Restored. I mean, I think it, can offer opportunities to small businesses and artists that otherwise they wouldn't have access to. But yeah, I think it's hard when you're also looking at these larger systemic factors, like just the general unaffordability, the rapidly rising rents, rapidly rising real estate values and real estate speculation, you know, just like capitalism and how that usually will squeeze out, first and foremost, people of color-owned businesses, immigrant and refugee-owned businesses, like the folks that are, you know, already going to struggle to have access to the same economic opportunity and visibility. I'm glad that people keep trying, and I think that is a key, that we keep, you know, caring about these spaces and understanding their value and trying things. But I also think that there's like, I mean, I've seen so many GoFundMes and so many campaigns to save spaces, which is great. But at some point it seems like, well, is the onus just on us as concerned residents and consumers to save all these places? Like, what about some policy interventions?
How do you think accounts like, excuse my language, Seattle looks like shit, have contributed to the narrative that Seattle is not a viable place to live in? And why do you think those narratives are dangerous? And how's an account like Vanishing Seattle counteracting against that?
Yeah, I mean, it does kind of remind me of the whole, like, Como, Seattle is dying, like, pseudo documentary that came out a few years ago. And yeah, I think it's very fear-based. I think it's inaccurate. And I think it's a lot of times politically motivated and meant to be divisive and othering. Yeah, I think it has been sad because I have felt like there's been more of a divide and like increased polarization locally, which I think mirrors a national trend too. And I think that is done by intent. And I think it just serves to like further marginalize people who are already marginalized. And so I feel like there has been, I've seen instances where there just seems to be like a real erosion of empathy. And at the same time, we have this increasing economic divide, this increasing like social stratification, which again, I think is just not good for our city. So I don't really know what the point is sometimes of those type of accounts. I mean, I think I know that it's like politically motivated and kind of driving people to be like, well, this, and I've seen this happen in like my organizing work where sure, like, yes, I think it's totally valid to be concerned about safety and the health of your neighborhood and your neighbors. But sometimes when you insert that kind of like fear and hatred, and then sometimes the solutions are presented as like, well, we need more surveillance, we need more money to like gentrify and get certain types of people out of here, and to get like more luxury developments and rich people, and like that's going to solve all the problems. Like I've literally seen these talking points being given by some developers in the International District. Yeah, like there's a lot going on there, but I do think those kind of like messages and narratives are ultimately harmful to our communities and to our health as a city. And it bums me out to see it gain traction sometimes.
How do you see Vanishing Seattle evolving and the coverage that the account takes in and relays to your followers, to the community?
Yeah, I mean, I think, there's a lot of different things that I want to do with the account. I mean, I think I've been super lucky and really grateful for some of the directions it's taken me, some of the projects and collaborations I've gotten to be a part of since I started it. So it went from being, a primarily social media account, which it still is, to a documentary film series. The first series had 6 documentary shorts, and we're working on a second series, of which 3 have been recently completed or making the film festival circuit. And with film, I feel, with like Instagram, I feel kind of constrained in terms of like the depth of story you can tell with like a limited captions and so many pictures, and then it just continually gets bumped down in people's feeds. Obviously with a platform like film, you can do like a deeper dive beyond the hashtag. And also like a lot of the films are not necessarily just eulogies for places that have vanished, like Hardwick's Hardware, but we'll do quite a lot of stories on places that are resisting displacement and are resisting vanishing. So like Wanawari in the Central District, or Queer the Land in Beacon Hill, that have are implementing these really brilliant models as like an alternative to, you know, being displaced from their communities. I think the thing that gives me hope is that I do see a fair amount of unvanishings, and I do see that people care and come together and try to save the spaces that matter to them, or go on and make new spaces that, you know, can kind of carry on that that spirit of bringing people together. So I think if I didn't have hope and, you know, feel that it's like still a really cool city with full of like really dope folks, like I just wouldn't, I'd be like, what's the point? And I wouldn't do it. So the point is not to make people feel hopeless or to give up or to have apathy, right? It's like for people to care more and to get engaged in, you know, whatever way makes sense to them, you know, with their neighbors, or shopping locally, or learning more about local policies, or organizing, or making art, or whatever it is, you know. I think it's really let 1,000 flowers bloom, and I think I'm just a small piece of that. So again, like folks